Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei get betrayed by all his girls and become Ghostface? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Soul Ripper Ghost 95 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. Issei Hyoudou was in the middle of a battle with Rivzime Lucifer along with DXD team by his side. Rivzime Lucifer had then got out a new weapon that looked like some sort of gun and fire a beam at Issei armor. Issei whole red armor was shattered to pieces as Issei fell to the ground, as he became badly hurt as blood poured down his whole body. There was a red dragon with glowing green eyes that was floating out of the shattered armor. Rivzime Lucifer then pointed his gun at the red dragon and fired the shot, destroyed the red dragon into nothingness. Rivzime had killed the red dragon Drake and destroyed Issei's sacred gear with his new weapon. I did it! I killed the red dragon Drake. Now you are nothing without your sacred gear. Rivzime shouted out in triumphantly and then disappears in a magic circle, leaving Issei on his knees beaten and covered in his own blood. Issei! All the girls scream out and came rushing to his side. Rias held Issei in her arms, looking worried for her pawn. Issei, she said sadly. Issei-kun. Akino said sadly as well. Issei-san? Asia said with tears in her eyes. The rest of the group looking on in sadness at Issei. The next day, Issei was in his room recovering after the battle. After losing his sacred gear and Drake dying, the girls check up on him, seeing that he was doing alright. Time skip. It has been about 4 weeks since Rivzime Lucifer had killed the red dragon Drake. Issei wasn't as strong enough without the boosted gear. Issei had failed in protecting Asia from danger from the bad guys. It was up to Zenobia to save Asia's life. After saving the blonde bishop life, she killed the bad guy by chopping off each of thy head off clean and chopping up their body parts as well. Time skip. It was now 1 month now. Everybody like the Occult Research Club, Student Council, Devil Factions, Fallen Angel Factions, Valet Team and Issei parents were all gathered in the living room at the Hyoudou residence. Surzek was sitting down on one of the couch who had his leg crossed, was sipping tea that was made by Akino. Issei, there's something we need to talk about your sacred gear, Surzek said with a serious expression on his face. The fact that the red dragon Drake is now dead, and your sacred gear is destroyed. Drake who is never coming back. It has been over a month now, but you are not as strong as you used to be without the boosted gear. There was a few minutes silent in the room, until Surzek spoke once more. I have come to a decision, and made up my mind about the whole situation. Surzek looked at Issei in his eyes with an emotionless expression on his face. Issei Hyoudou, it's look like you can no longer be in my little sister peerage anymore, since you longer have Drake inside you anymore, and no longer have a sacred gear. So that mean, you are no longer worth it to us or being in my little sister peerage anymore. Surzek said coldly, as there was no kindness in his eyes but only coldness in his blue-green eyes. There was an ice-cold demeanor, as the whole room fell silent. Issei's heart sank, and was so shocked at what Surzek had just said to him. He just had his wiped open, and felt his heart breaking. Surzek was like an older brother to him, and yet he wanted him gone from Rias peerage and DXD team. Indeed, Surzek. Issei is of no use to us now, or your little sister and her peerage. And no use for DXD team anymore, since he is now useless to everybody without the boosted gear. Azazel nodded as he also agrees with Surzek. Azazel turned to Issei with a nasty scowl on his face. Issei, you are no longer a part of the DXD team, as you are worthless to all of us now. Azazel said coldly as he narrows his eyes. Issei looked around the room expecting someone to argue with Surzek and Azazel's statement, but nobody to his surprise said a single word. Both brother and Azazel are right, Issei. You are no longer of use to me in my peerage now, since you lost your sacred gear, and the fact that Drake is now dead. I will now officially be terminating our engagement between us and you. Issei Hyoudou will no longer be a part of my peerage and family anymore, as you are known useless to us. Rias said coldly. She just looked at him with cruel eyes as the air was still filled with an ice-cold demeanor. Issei looked shocked and couldn't believe what he was hearing and couldn't even speak. The woman he loves was saying such things. After all I did for you. I saved you from your married to Riser Phoenix and done so much for you. And this the thank I got? Sorry, Issei, but you are no longer useful to us anymore. Since you failed to protect Asia and it was up to Zenobia to save her, and the fact that without the boosted gear, you are nothing but dead weight, and not useful to anymore. So I had no other choice but to kick you out of my peerage, since you no longer can be any use to me and my peerage anymore, and just now a pathetic, worthless loser that I no longer need anymore. Rias said calmly. But Rias. I know I failed to protect Asia, but it wasn't my fault. I thought that you loved me? How could you agree with Surzek and Azazel about kicking me out? How could you even think of doing something like this to the man you love? Issei yelled out in sadness and tears falling down his cheek. Rias just looked at Issei in disgust, as she looks like she was about to be sick just by looking at him. Rias then spoke in a cold voice. I never love you, Issei. I just used you for your power. You were just a source of power for me in my peerage. Since that day I found out that you had boosted gear during that incident with the fallen angel Rainier, and when you fought against Riser. I thought that I could use your power for me in my peerage, so I just pretend to have feeling for you just so I could keep you under my control. But now you outlived your usefulness to us. You are now just a disposable pawn that I no longer need anymore. Rias said harshly, as she crosses her arms over her, making them bound. Issei felt his heart broken by his master's cold words. Did you honestly believe that a beautiful woman like myself would fall in love with a pathetic, pervert loser like you? Rias mocked and sneered in disgust. Rias showed absolutely no remorse for her harsh words. Issei felt his heart sank and felt tears slowly rolling down his cheek. Do you want to know the truth, Issei? Issei didn't say anything. Your first girlfriend. The fallen angel Rainier, who had killed you on your date. I was there the whole time watching you, and let you die so I could make you my servant. Issei winded his eyes in complete shock, and was in disbelief at what his girlfriend and master had just said. He just stood frozen in place, and couldn't move his body. That right, Issei? I let you suffer all this time by just watching you get killed by Rainier the fallen angel dominant slag. I waited by the tree watching the whole thing, waiting for that slutty whore Rainier to stab you with her light spear. So that I could revive you and live for me as my slave, Rias said with an evil, sadist smirk on her face. Rias was getting turned on by telling him the truth and seeing the look on his face. Issei felt his heart plunge at hearing the truth from his girlfriend and master. I mean, how dumb can you be? Did not you realize by coincidence that you received a leaflet from my familiar that day of your date with that slut Rainier, and how I know Rainier human identity known as Yuma Amano? Suddenly her eyes slowly turned crimson red and her whole face turned demonic as her face twisted into an evil, dark, sinister smirk. She cackled evilly at what she had done to him. Issei then realized in his head, the woman I love, the woman that I will always fight for, and the woman I had sacrificed an arm to get her out of her marriage's Aegis Riser Phoenix. My master and girlfriend Rias Gremory was nothing but an evil, manipulated, cold-hearted bitch, and was nothing but a complete monster with no remorse for what she had done to me. Issei could just see pure evil in Rias Gremory's blue-green eyes. Rias Gremory was showing her true color, as the evil she-devil that she was from the beginning. I also agree with Bucho. You are no longer our comrades, as you are just nothing but lowly trash to us now. So, get lost, you talentless bastard, Kiba said with cold eyes as he looks at Issei in disgust. Bucho and Kiba-kun are both right. You are no longer any use to the peerage, and I don't consider you my cute kohai, as you are now useless to Bucho, myself and the rest of the peerage. Akino said in a cold voice. She even didn't smile her usual friendly smile. Rias and Akino both went over to Kiba and each started hugging him and rubbing their large onto his. Kiba wrapped his arms around both girls. Kiba ing both Rias and Akino, and putting his hand up their skips and rubbing their pussy. Making the two girls out in pleasure. Issei felt his heart twisted and was overwhelmed with tears. As he watches them making out with Kiba right in front of him. Not even caring about his feeling, Rias then turned to face him. I and Akino have found a better looking and handsome man to replace you, as our lover. Hyoudou Kiba. He is so much better at being a boyfriend than you, Issei, she said in a spiteful tone of voice, while Kiba just smiled smugly at Issei. He didn't even care about stealing Rias, the woman that Issei loved, and two of his harem members that he stole away from him. Issei was in sadness, and felt his heart broken even more. Zenobia then spoke up. Issei, you can no longer able to give me a strong child if you no longer have the red dragon inside of you. So, that mean you are not worth fit of giving me a child anymore. I also agree with Bucho and the others of kicking you out of the peerage, as you are now nothing to us anymore but useless trash to us. Zenobia replied as she looks at Issei with a blank look on her face. Besides, I have now found another person who can give me strong children. Zenobia then went over to Valley, as he then held her in his arms, Vala tilting her head back, as they both stare into each eye. Then each other lipped piantly with while Vala grabbed her, and gave her a good squeeze. Vala s his tongue into her. Both Vala and Zenobia started getting really aggressive with one another. Vala with his other hand groped her while keep on squeezing Zenobia, making the blue-haired girl loudly, while saying his name. They sensual lasted for a few more minutes before pulling away from each other. Issei was shocked and had his window open. Vala turned to face Issei with a blank look of his face. Not once caring that he stole Issei harem members away from him. Without your boosted gear and the fact that the red dragon drake is now dead, I no longer consider you a rival anymore. As you are now just a lowly humanoid devil dragon, Vala said in a disappointed tone, as he just gave Issei a blank look of boredom. Kuroka then spoke. Naya, without the heavenly dragon drake inside of you anymore. That mean you, Issei, is not even worth it anymore of giving me strong children to bloom my Nekomata race. And you are also no longer good enough for my little sister, Chiron. You are now in fact worthless to both of us. So, I couldn't give two shit about what happened to you, Kuroka said harshly and looked at him in disgust. Issei-senpai? Kaneko spoke coldly in a whisper with hatred clearly in her voice. You are useless without your sacred gear, and not even worth keeping around anymore. To be honest, I had never liked you one bit. I only started liking you, so that I could have you gave me strong children in the future. But without the boosted gear and the red dragon inside your body, you are now worthless. I had always hated your guts since day one, Kaneko said in a harsh, cold, unfeeling and cruel tone of voice. Irina was the next to speak. Issei, you are no use to any of us anymore without the red dragon drake. So, that mean that you, my old childhood friend, is no longer fit to be my friend or lover anymore, as you are nothing but garbage to me now. So, siding with the others of kicking you out of DXD was necessary. Irina said coldly, staring at her former childhood friend with a cold look in her eyes. You are no son of our. Mr. Hyoudou and Mrs. Hyoudou both shouted out with disgust on their faces. The Hyoudou both stare at their son with hatred-filled scowls smeared across their faces. You have always been a disappointment to us since the day you were born. Mr. Hyoudou said harshly. We want you gone. Leave our home at once, you worthless pervert son, and never come back here again. Both, your mother and I, disown you as our child. So, just do us a favor and disappear from this household. You are no longer welcome here or a part of our family anymore, like your father said, Issei. We disown you as our child. Because our child died along with the red dragon drake in battle. So, please just leave at once and never come back, Mrs. Hyoudou said coldly. Issei stepped back in shock. He knew that his parents were always ashamed of him for being a pervert, and since he was a little kid, he could never please his parents. No matter what he did, they always ignore him. His perverse nature came from a deep-seated self-loathing from his childhood along with parents. Both his father and mother always neglected him, since he was a child, and never gave him any attention. And on top of that, his parents were sometimes psychology and physical abusive toward Issei. They were not good parents at all. The Hyoudou in fact were nothing more than horrible, evil, abusive, neglectful people who never care about their son, Issei, since he was born. Issei parents would always tell Issei that he was nothing but a failed of a son, that no girls would ever love him. His parents would always put him down, saying that all the girls were too good for such a waste of space like him. Our perverted, idiotic, worthless failed of a son who we never thought would get anywhere in life, would ever get a girlfriend. Even though we'd given up hope, always telling him that he was worthless, and that nobody would ever love a loser like him. He felt even more tears in his eyes. In a final effort, Issei turns to face Asia, thinking that she would be on his side, but Asia shook her head. I am really sorry, Issei. But everybody in this room does have a point. Without your sacred gear, how can you able to protect us anymore without the red dragon inside of you? How would able to protect me or the rest of us? So that mean, you can no longer can stay with us anymore, and you are no longer a part of our life anymore. So you have to leave, Asia said as she then looks down at the ground nervously, as she couldn't look at him anymore. Issei couldn't believe what his sweet and innocent Asia had just said. Asia, one of the person he could count on to stand by his side, was siding with them. He felt even more heartbroken. I already have find someone else, Asia mumbled out. She walks over and made her way to Vala. Vala and Asia begin to each other slowly. Issei was in complete shock, and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Vala was gentle with his affection with Asia, rubbing her with gentle touch of his fingers, making her out a little. Asia and Vala drew toward each other, and started ing. They lasted for a few minutes until breaking apart. Issei felt even more tears falling down his cheek, and felt so heartbroken. Serzek, not even caring or showing any concern, speak to Issei. Issei, I want you to stay away from the underworld, as you are no longer welcome there. Since you don't have the red dragon drake inside you anymore, and now worthless to us, you can no longer benefit us. If you ever show your face around in the underworld again, we will, destroyed you. Do I make myself clear? Surzek said darkly as he just glares at Issei with cruel eyes. Issei didn't say anything, so just took his silence as a yes. That right? Don't come anywhere near the underworld, you piece of dog shit. Because if you do, I will personally rip your lung out from your body, and torture you to death. Seraphal shot out in rage. Seraphal was usually a careful free, cheer, and happy-go-lucky person who was always smiling and acting silly. But she now had a mean, nasty scowl on her face, as she glares at him. Sona also put in her 2 cents. Don't bother coming into school the next day, as you're no longer a student here in Ku Academy. Your school record has already been wiped off. If you dare steps foot on the school campus again, me and my peerage will all be forced to kill you. Sona said darkly, as her glees flashed dangerously. Yeah, that right? Don't ever come back to the school again. You are just a nobody to all of us now. I will be the one to personally kill you myself if you ever step foot on the school again. Saji said with a scowl on his face. Saji was so far up Sona. That one time she asked him to wipe the shit out of her, as she couldn't be brother to wipe her own. So Saji happily wiped her with a stupid grin on his face, and even the shit from her with his tongue. All the devils, fallen angels and angels also were saying the same nasty things to Issei like everyone did. Rias had her 2 servants hold her former pawn while she removes the 8-pawn piece from Issei's body. After she was done with that, she put the 8-pawn piece away and turned to face Issei. You can leave now as I had removed the pawn pieces from inside you. Now get thee out of my face. You already making me sick by looking at you. Don't ever come back into our life ever again. You stupid. Rias said with hateful cruelness in her voice. Mr. Hyoudou and Mrs. Hyoudou then tossed his bag at his feet. Get thee out of our house. You piece of worthless garbage. Both parents screamed out with hate and shame in their eyes. We don't care where you go, but just as long as you are out of this household. And that we never have to see your petty-looking face around here again. Mr. Hyoudou hissed out in a cold voice. Issei, you can go die for all I care. I just want you to leave my home already. Mrs. Hyoudou said in a hateful tone, and just stare at her son like he was trash. Issei felt so hurt by their nasty, heartless and cruel words, as he feels his heart breaking with the nastiness that everybody was treating him. You heard everybody. You are not wanted here anymore. You pervert bastard. So, do everybody a favor and get out of here or kill yourself for all we care, Kaneko said harshly, as she glares at him with hate in her eyes. Issei looked at everybody, tears still falling down his cheek. He could see the harsh look in their eyes, that everybody didn't even give to shit or show any remorse. Issei couldn't control his tears falling. As more and more tears rolled down his cheek like a waterfall, none of them even care how he about his feeling, not even showing any sympathy at how hurt and broken he was. How could the woman that he loves, his so-called friends, his parents, well, there were never good parents to begin with, the 3 great powers, and everyone else do this to him? After all he had done for them, the only person who didn't betray him were Gasper, Rosweiss, Ophis and Ravel, as those 4 were absent and weren't here in the household. Ravel was back in the underworld with Ophis, while Rosweiss and Gasper were in their house land learning more magic and new skills. Issei started shaking in rage, glaring at the traitors with so much anger inside of him, after all he did for them. Everybody just betray him like this, treating him nothing but trash, saying such awful and terrible things to him, and kicking him out of the peerage because he no longer had drag and his sacred gear. Something inside of Issei just snapped. He started shaking his whole body in pure rage and clenching his fists repeatedly. His aura started to slowly flare outward. Issei's anger was now radiating of him, and his eyes slowly turned green in color. They were all started to wonder if they had pushed him too far. Bastard, he whispered out angrily. Cold-hearted bastard. Wicked, terrible people. Evil, heartless bastard. Scumbag. Heartless monster. Issei stared at everybody and now had a murderous glare in his eyes. Some creepy red/black aura appears around his whole body, and his eyes glowing bright green. Damn you! I will make you heartless bastard suffer for your betrayed. Issei let out a howl of anger, sadness, sorrow, anguish and rage, as he then run at his douchebag parents first and lash out with his fist aimed at them. Mr. Hyoudou and Mrs. Hyoudou both looking on in fear. They were both about to dodge out of the way, when Issei nailed his fist straight at his father, and punched him hard in the face, knocking him onto the ground. Mr. Hyoudou now had a broken nose and a few teeth fall out of his. As Mr. Hyoudou was slowly getting back up, Issei slammed his fist into the ample stomach of his father, doubling him over before coating his fist with demonic power and smash her into his face, sending him soaring through the living room and crashing into the table, breaking it into pieces. Issei looked at his mother and punched her in the head with his fist still coated in demonic power. Mrs. Hyoudou dropped onto her knees. He then delivered a spinning kick to his mother's face, knocking the life out of her, seeing what he had done to his own parents. Everyone then charged at Issei. Kaneko was the first to reach him, drawing her fist to let a flying strike at Issei, and was about to punch Issei from behind. But Issei turned around just in time, and punched Kaneko right in the face hard with a powerful punch with his fist coated in crimson ki, sending the small rook flying backward, and rolling over onto the floor and crash into the wall with a hard thud. Kaneko spied up a lot of blood from her, then ping out onto the floor. Bastard! You will pay for that! Kiba yelled out with murder in his eyes and charged toward Issei, as he summons two demonic holy swords in both of his hands. Kuroko was also angry about her little sister be hurt. She too charges toward Issei at the same time as Kiba. But she got to Issei first and began to attack. Her hands were already coated in senjutsu, and started throwing fire blasts of energy at Issei. The fire blasts heading toward Issei, but he easily deflected them by just waving his hands in the whirlwinds, sending her own attack toward the black-haired Nekomata. Kuroko's eyes winded in shock and horror. She was about to dodge out of the way, but it was too late. Her own attack already hit her straight at her body. Gagag! Kuroko let out a scream of pain and horror. As she felt her skin being burned, Issei quickly ran up to her and punched her in the stomach, as hard as he could. She spits out blood from her. He grabs a hold of her two cat tail and violently rips them out. Kuroko screamed out in everlasting pain before Issei punched her again in the stomach, and tossed her aside, knocking her out cold. Kiba had now reached Issei and run toward him with his knight's speed. Kiba was about to slash at Issei with his two swords, but Issei quickly grabs the swords out of his hands. Kiba was shocked by this, as his eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his head. Issei then slammed both swords' handle at Kiba's face, breaking his nose and knocking him onto the floor. While Kiba was on the ground, Issei then hacks at Kiba's shoulders with the holy demonic sword about 4 times, and hacks at his legs and about 4 times as well, while blood splashes everywhere, even splashes onto Issei's whole face. While he has some of the blood on his lip, enjoying the taste of Kiba blood. Kiba let out a loud scream until Issei slammed his boot into Kiba's face, knocking him out cold. Irina was the next to attack. She summons a couple of light spears in her hands. She aimed the light spears toward him while yelling out, "Die, in the name of our dead god." Then she throws the light spear toward her former child friend. Issei deftly dodged, and avoided the light spears that were coming toward him. Irina was so shocked by this, and couldn't believe it. She was about to summon more light spears and everybody else were all rushing toward him. But Issei quickly unleashed a wave of ki at the devil, fallen angels, the rest of Rias peerage, Sona peerage, and even the rest of Valentine were all smashed into the nearby wall and were injured. Issei then quickly picks up a chair and throws it toward Irene, hitting her straight in her body. Irina drops down onto the floor screaming her head off with a loud thud onto the ground. Issei walk over to the down Irina, pick Irina up by her hair and raise up his fist. Issei then punched Irina straight in the face as hard as he could with his fist covered in red ki, as she drops to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Saliva came out of her as she drops to her knees. Issei then grabs a handful of Irina's hair and pulled her close, that her face was a mere inch away from his own. Irina whimpered as there was blood trickling from her lip, and hit Irina about 3 times. Her face was a bit bloodied and her nose was broken a bit. Issei then lifted Irina off from her feet, and then tossed her like a rag doll. Irina went flying and smashed against the outside GL window. Irina screamed out in pain and fall unconscious outside onto the ground covered in blood and a few glees sticking in her flesh and body. Saji tried to attack Issei from behind. He summons his sacred gear and was about to connect the line onto to his former friend and rival, to absorb his power and end Issei's rampage. But to his surprise the line had no effects on him. Issei just pulled on the connect line that was now stuck on his arm, and started pulling on the line, making Saji flying toward him. Now that Saji was close to him, Issei grabbed Saji by his shirt, and raised up his fist, and punched him in the face, knocking him onto the ground. The next thing Saji knew was that he was picked off from the floor, and hurled across the room. He flew through midair and slammed bodily into Ruruko and Momo, knocking them both out cold. Issei went over and grabbed Saji off from the floor. He then started running toward the big mirror that was in the room, and started repeatedly smashing his face against the mirror repeatedly. By the time he stops doing that, Saji's whole face was covered in blood with bit of broken GL sticking in his face. Saji let out a scream that rang throughout the house. Issei gripped onto Saji's right hand and rips it out of his bone socket. Blood pouring out of the socket and splashing everywhere. Saji looked at his armless right arm in horror. My arm! My arm! Saji was crying out in so much pain and started foaming at the. Issei lifted Saji and then slammed his back over his knee, snapping and breaking his back. Saji screamed at the top of his lung, as his eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his head. He was in so much pain. Issei just then tossed Saji's beaten body aside like a lifeless puppet. While in the meantime, Kaneko in the corner of the room was slowly getting back up, as Saji's badly beaten body was flying toward her. Kaneko then noticed the flying body of Saji heading toward her. Kaneko could only say 2 words, "Oh," before the body of Saji landing on top on her, knocking her out cold once more. Issei then saw his former father slowly begin to get back up from the floor. Blood was seeping out of his whole body and Mr. Hyoudou looked at his son fearfully. "Issei, please have mercy on me." Mr. Hyoudou started begging like the coward that he truly was with petty tears falling down his eyes. Issei glared at his father in hatred. "You along with everybody else had betrayed me. Disowned me by telling me I am just nothing but worthless trash, and that I was no longer your son. And on top of all that, did you show mercy when you violently beaten me as a child? Did you show mercy when your UAL abused me when I was just a little kid? When you raped me?" Issei said with venom and hatred in his voice. Issei remembered all the evil and up things his own father did to him as a child. His evil, bastard father would use to beat him in secret when he was just a child, while his bitch of a mother just watched the whole thing, laughing sadistically at her son's pain, enjoying every minute of her son's suffering. He remembers that one time, his father beaten him badly for spilling milk onto the floor by accident. He remembers when he was 10-year-old, that he once had a baby sister named Misaki. She was only 4-year-old when she was murdered by his bastard father. His father was in a bad mood that day from work and took his anger out on his baby sister. His father picks her up from the ground and throw her against the wall and slam her onto the floor until her bone broke each time. His father watched his daughter slowly dying with an evil scowl on his face, showing no remorse for his action. His sick bastard of a father had raped him when he was a child since he was 6-year-old of age. Only stopped when he was 11-year-old. Mr. Hyoudou, his father, was pure evil with no redeeming features. He was nothing but an evil, neglectful, abusive, child-molesting rapist, and a complete monster who had gotten away with every evil thing that he'd done in his life. Anger started to boil up inside of him, as he remembers all the terrible things his father had done in the past. Issei grabbed his father's face, and slammed his knee in his face repeatedly. Blood spewed from his nose and with each blow to the face. After he stopped doing that, his father's face was now covered in blood, his nose broken even more, and his face all bruised up with black and blue marking. But Issei wasn't done with him just yet. Issei, using all his strength, and slammed into Mr. Hyoudo's stomach with his fist coated in ki, sending the man flying backward. As he was flying backward, he slammed into Mrs. Hyoudou, who was slowly getting back up, only to be knocked down again unconscious. Lot of dark crimson ki energy surrounding his whole body. A small demonic ki blast forming in his hand. Issei then throwing the crimson ki blast at his father's left arm. Mr. Hyoudo's eyes winded and tried to avoid the ki blast that was heading for his arm. But it was too late, as the crimson ki blast shot through his left arm, slicing his left arm off clean. Blood started pouring out of the wound. Mr. Hyoudou looked at his left arm with wide eyes and a shock expression on his face. He had his wide open. A loud scream rang throughout the household. Issei lifted his leg up and gave a swift, hard kick straight in his jaw, sending him flying up into midair and dropped down onto his knee. Issei then viciously kicked him in the ribs. Mr. Hyoudou started coughing and spitting up blood and mucus out of his. Issei continuously kicking Mr. Hyoudou over again, until he falls unconscious. Issei looked ahead and saw a few others still standing. He also saw the people he had injured were getting back up, thanks to Asia healing them, and everybody were now charging toward him. Issei also charged toward them. "You want to ing fight? Come on then, you ing bastard. You won't take me alive." He was going to beat them one by one until he was the last man standing. Rias Gremory was the first person to attack Issei. A crimson aura cloaked her whole body. She sends blasted of power of destruction toward her former pawn, Issei, but the former pawn just baited it away like it was nothing, sending the power of destruction toward a nearby wall. The wall broken into 1,000 pieces. Issei then sent a power crimson blast toward his former master. Rias tried to block the attack by putting up a magic circle, but the crimson blast just went though, breaking the magic circle to pieces and hitting Rias. The crimson hair princess was sent flying backward, knocking over several devils in the way, as she hit the wall with a hard thud. After a minute of pain shooting through her body, Rias slowly stood up on her shaking legs. She wiped the blood from her with now an anger glare toward her former pawn. Rias shot a blast of her crimson demonic power that was now heading toward Issei. She has a very serious expression on her face, as her blue-green eyes darker. Akino, who had now joined her king, had now transformed into her priestess outfit. Kuroko was back on her feet after being healed by Asia and her two tails back where they belong. Kiba was back on his feet as well thanks to Asia healing his wounds. Rias, Akino, Kuroka and Kiba all had Issei cornered like a rat. Rias' smirk stretched across her face. With her, Akino, Kuroka and Kiba all attacking her former pawn at once. Issei would lose this battle and there will all put an end to his rampage once, and for all. Rias began to gather a strong sinister crimson demonic power into her hand. Her face was serious, and only darkness in her cold heartless blue-green eyes. Akino shot out to the sky above. Sparks of yellow crackling around her hand. Her right palm crackled yellow sparks of lighting. She had a serious expression on her face. She sends her thunderbolt that flew toward Issei along with Rias, destructive demonic power that was now heading toward Issei. Both Rias and Akino send their attack toward Issei along with Kuroka orbs and Kiba holy demonic sword. They heard Issei screaming in pain as their attack had hit him. There was dust everywhere, and Issei was nowhere to be seen. Rias and Kuroka both smirked to each other, as they along with the other two had killed Issei for good. The evilness in two women expressions were truly terrifying to see, as there was nothing but evilness in Rias and Kuroka heart. Is that the best you guys can do? Rias, Akino, Kiba and Kuroka eyes all winded in shock and couldn't believe what they were hearing and seeing. There was Issei looking at them with deadly eyes with a small smirking forming on his. Suddenly Issei ran up to Rias as quickly as he could, and punched Rias across the face, as hard as he could. Rias felt blood ran down her face. Issei grabbed hold of her neck and uppercut Rias hard across the face, that she ending up flying backward and smash her onto the floor with a thud. Kuroka then teleported behind Issei and tried attacking when his guard was down. Issei quickly turned to face her and formed some demonic crimson beam into his hand and launched them at the Nekishu. The black hair feline hazel gold eyes winded and she leaped backward. She quickly put up a velvet purple circle behind that move in front of her, protection her. But Issei attack instantly went straight toward her. Kuroka tried to absorb the attack, but it shattered into pieces as Issei attack came into contact. In the crossfire the attack hit the black hair Nekishu and sending her flying and crashing onto the ground. Kuroka started to fire the 4 orbs that orbited around her toward the brown-haired young man. None of them hit Issei, her target, which angered her to no end. With a howl of anger and frustration, Kuroka nails began to grow longer and sharper. She then lunged at the former pawn with her sharp nails, ready to claw his eyes out. But Issei grabbed both of her hands, shocking the Nekishu. Issei bent his head back, and began hit her hard in her about 6 times. Her skull cracked a bit as blood started to slowly pour from her head, down to her black kimono. Aya Rafferg! She screams in pain. He then lifts her up in the air and smashes her down onto the ground with a hard thud. Rias was about to use her power of destruction once again, and aim toward her former pawn. But Issei, as quickly as he could, pick up Kuroka's lifeless body and throw her straight toward Rias. The crimson hair woman didn't have time to dodge out of the way, as the body of Kuroka directly hit Rias, knocking the wind out of her. Error! Both Kuroka and Rias roll over onto the ground roughly, and both ended up hitting the wall with a hard thud. Rias and Kuroka were now both unconscious. Akino sent a lighting attack toward Issei. The black hair queen managed to hit Issei with her lighting attack, which made him crashing onto the ground a thud. He felt so much pain. But he wasn't down for long as he slowly got back up. Issei summoned some demonic power into his hand and threw toward Akino, who dodged out of the way in time. The demonic power went crashing into the ceiling wall. The ceiling wall begins to crumble down and breaking into pieces. Akino and Issei kept sending attack to each other, and dodging them each time. Kiba got behind Issei with his knight speed. Before Kiba could try to attack him from behind, Issei turned around. He quickly grabbed onto Kiba's hands and lifted him up in the air. He then tosses him straight into Akino, who didn't have time to catch Kiba. The blonde knight ending up bumping into her, and both fall unconscious onto the ground. Issei fought off some devils, fallen angels, Sona, and Tsubaki. Sarah Fall was a challenging, but in the end, he won the fight against her. He took out most of Sona peerages like Momo, Ruruko, Tsubasa, Tomo and Rhea, as those 5 were the weakest out of Sona peerage members, and were not a threat in the first place, and were not as strong or challenging like most of Rias peerage members were, Valatim, Surzax and the devils, Azazel and the fallen angels, and Michael and his angels. Issei then saw Asia start healing some of the people he had injury and hurt. I was so stupid enough of not knocking Asia out. She healing them all. Issei though in his head with a frown on his face. I have to put a stop to it. He then disappeared and reappeared in front of Asia in a flash. The former nun looked up at Issei in fear as her whole body started shaking. Issei glared at her in anger. The girl he once would always protect with his life. The girl he saw as a little sister. The girl he starts to have deep feeling for like the rest of the girl in his former harem. She was no longer none of those things. She had betrayed him just like everybody else did and was now with Vala. Issei then raises up his hand and backhand her hard across the face, knocking her onto the floor, as she rolls onto the floor with a hard thud. Asia was now knocked out cold. You bastard, piece of shit! Zenobia shouted out in anger, and charged toward her former comrade with her Durandal. Dark blue aura start form around her whole body and a dark glint in her eyes. Die in the name of our dead god, bastard. Her Durandal releases a mighty amount of aura with destructive power. She unleashes pure, destructive power that can easily shatter anything it meets, sending it toward Issei. Issei dodged out of the way, as the destructive aura was heading toward him. The destructive aura end up smashing the kitchen, as bit of the wall crumble into pieces and dust start to appear everywhere. Zenobia was surprised by this, but that didn't stop her. She charges toward him and swung her sword down upon Issei, ready to end his life once and for all. But Issei blocked her attack by putting up a barrier in front of him. Using all his demonic power in the barrier, he pushes her back, unleashes his demonic power toward her, sending the blue-haired young woman flying backward, and crash into the roof, and fall back down onto the ground with a hard thud. Arg! Zenobia screamed out in pain, as she felt agonizing pain spread through her whole body. A few minutes she slowly begins to get back up, blood now dripping down her face and body. Zenobia let out a growl of frustration and once again charged toward Issei, swings and slashed her Durandal at him. Issei summoned demonic power into his hand and throw at Zenobia's leg. Her whole leg started bleeding and burn as the flesh of her leg started to peel off. Zenobia let out a scream of pure pain. Before Issei could knock Zenobia out cold, Vala got into his divine dividing balance breaker scale mail, and quickly flew toward Issei and punched him hard in the stomach. Issei was launched backwards several meters and ended up hitting the wall with a hard thud, coughing out blood from his. Vala slowly walked toward his former rival. How does it feel, Issei? Vala asked with a smug tone in his voice. How does it feel that I stole 2 girls from your harem away from you? Vala said, started twisting the knife in. You, Issei Hyoudou, is going to suffer by my hands. I'm going to beat the living shit out of you, for what you did to Kuroka, Asia and Zenobia, Vala said in an ice-cold voice, and then punched Issei in his face, knocking onto the floor. Issei could no longer fight back as he was started to get tired, and losing some energy after fighting so many people. Issei now had some injured all over his body. After Vala was done beaten on Issei, he all your Surzex, Vala said as he steps aside. Surzex made his way over. A dark, large crimson ball formed into Surzek's hand and throw it toward Issei. The form pawn couldn't dodge that or move out of the way in time. A mine exploded, sending Issei 15 feet into the air and hitting the roof, as the large crimson ball had hit him. He falls back down to the ground with a hard thud. Issei was in so much pain, as his whole face twisted in agony, while he was just lying on the floor. He saw Surzex slowly coming toward him. He could see that the red-headed devil had only coldness in his blue-green eyes. Suddenly hooked chains spring in from nowhere to pin Issei down in place. Issei struggled trying to get of the chains, but it was no use. Then suddenly Surzex smacked Issei across the face, knocking him onto the ground. The crimson-hair man drew back his fist, coating it in crimson demonic power, and punched Issei in the ribs a few times. Issei screaming in pain and agony at each blow to his ribs. Surzex showed a malicious and evil sadist smirk on his face, and his eyes now had a sinister crimson glint in them. The punch kept on flying on him. Surzex landed a particularly strong punch into his stomach and ribs. Issei could feel his stomach and ribs hurting him so much that he spits out lot of blood from his. Ugh! Issei wincing as he felt his bruise that was sported all over his body. You certainly tried acting big trying to fight all of us at once. What was that about us not taking you alive? For a useless whelp to lose his shit when been kicked out from my little sister peerage and from the DXD team. And telling you we no longer need you anymore. You should have just left quietly. And none of the pain and stuffing would be happening to you right now. Surzek said with an evil and crazy look in his eyes, as he tilted his head, mocking Issei with nothing but evil and cruelness in his heart. Ing smug bastard. Issei though in his head in anger, rage, and pain at the same time. He wanted nothing but to wipe the smug smile off Surzek's face. The crimson hair man then slammed into his knee into Issei's stomach hard. Issei dropped onto the floor like a sack of potatoes, as he felt his inside broken. You are too pathetic, too weak and worthless piece of shit to had any of the girls liking you, Surzek said in a cold mocking voice, as his smirk became winded. He then viciously kicks Issei in his stomach so hard that Issei began to cough up a lot of blood from his. You are now a threat to us. Surzek spoke as he begins to ready his power of destruction, and aimed it at Issei. Surzek's unleashing small crimson blast of demonic power at Issei's whole body. Issei howled in pain. His whole body began to bleed violently, and felt his whole body in so pain. The chains still holding Issei in place. He falls onto his knees beaten and bloody. Surzek's demonic power wasn't enough to kill Issei, as the crimson hair man low his power. He just wanted to torture Issei first before killing him off. Surzek shook his finger, and the chains that was holding Issei disappear into thin air. He walks over to the beaten form pawn, and then pin Issei to the ground after he had severely beating him. With a sickening grin on his face, Surzek begins to stomp all over Issei's body with no mercy or remorse in his heart. While Surzek carried on with stomping and kicking Issei while he was still on the floor. While Issei was been beaten, and feeling agonizing pain in his entire body by the crimson hair Satan, Surzek's Lucifer, he couldn't help but think about his former brother-in-law. The person that he used to look up to. The crimson hair man that he once thought of as an older brother. Issei now could see Surzek for the evil, heartless, and cold-hearted bastard that he truly was. Issei could feel himself nearly going to faint and feeling his oxygen going out of him. He could see darkness start to seep in his vision, and his eyes rolling at the back of his head. Issei now just lay there lifeless on the floor. No longer moving anymore. His eyes slowly closing for the last time and his heartbeat slowly began to stop beating. Issei Hyoudou had died as there was a trail of blood now on the floor. Surzek then smirked evilly at what he had done. Ah ha 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 ha. The crimson hair man suddenly burst out laughing evilly at his former brother-in-law death by his own hands. Ah ha 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 ha. He couldn't stop laughing like a maniac as he remembers all the pain he put Issei through. There was madness in his blue-green eyes and couldn't stop his maniacal laughter. After he calmed down and stopped his evil laughter, he was about to walk over to the corpse of Issei, when suddenly a giant purple portal opened which knocked Surzek and the devils, fallen angels, and angels to the ground. The portal took the now dead body of Issei Hyoudou and then vanished into thin air with the dead corpses of Issei. Surzek at first was shocked at what just happened and then became angry, as his eyes were twisted into a sinister crimson-red glint and his whole face became demonic-looking. Surzek wanted to coop up Issei's dead body into pieces, and feed them to his demon dogs back in the deeper pity of the underworld. That sick and twisted the crimson hair man really was. But then he calms down, because at least he had killed Issei Hyoudou for good and that he was no longer a threat or danger anymore. Time skip. After a few weeks that Surzek had killed Issei, everybody got on with their life and all forgot about Issei as time went on. 1 week later, Vala was in bed with Asia and Zenobia, who were both. Asia was on the right side, cuddling Vala's arm with her small rubbing against his arm, while Zenobia was on the other left side, cuddling Vala's other arm with her big and rubbing it up and down. Asia and Zenobia both took turn in making love with Vala, the girls giving themselves willingly to Vala. Vala, the girls let out his name, as Vala groped and rubbed there with love. Vala began rubbing Asia small gently with care while at the same time, he roughly started rubbing Zenobia big with deep. Vala gently Asia neck. Vala roughly Zenobia neck. Meanwhile, Saji had beaten Sona in a game of chess. This surprised Sona very much that her pawn Saji had finally beaten her in chess. Sona decided to challenge her pawn in another game of chess. If Saji won, that would mean she would have to marry him soon. Shockingly enough, Saji had once again beaten her in chess. That mean that Sona would now be engaged to him. 2 weeks later, one Tuesday morning in school, Sona was at her desk busted with some paperworks. She then noticed a brown slip of documents was underneath the door. So, Sona left her desk and went over and picked up the documents. Sona picked up the documents and looked at them. Sona was shocked at what she saw as she scans the documents over. Later after school, Saji arrived at the student council office and participated in the student council meeting with the other. He was about sat in his seat when Sona came over and stopped him. Sona showed her pawn, Saji, the documents that she had gotten. As he scans the documents, his eyes winded in shock, his heart skip a beat, and cold sweats begin falling at the back of his neck. Is this true? Sona demanded coldly, as her glees flashed dangerously. Saji started sweating nervously and felt a cold chilly go down his spine. He could see the anger in her eyes, the coldness of her eyes, the disgust in her tone of voice and dark aura that was now around her whole body. Saji! I said, is this true? Sona roared out in anger and got right in his face. So, am where the question already. What is this all about, Sona? Risa, Sona's best friend and rival, asked in concern. Yes, like what Rias-chan said. What is this all about? Sona's older and childlike sister, Sarah Fall, asked her baby sister in worried tone of voice. Sona didn't say anything and just handed them the documents to both women. Rias and Sarah Fall both look over the documents and were in shock at what they read. The rest of Rias' peerage and Sona peerage also look at the documents as well. Like Rias and Sarah Fall were also in shock as well. The documents were about. In the past, Saji was an offender and serial rapist who has committed many UAL attacks on several girls since the age of 10 to 14-year-old of age. He had molested his own 2 young sisters and tried to get them both pregnant. He had raped and killed about 4 young girls at the age of 13 to 14. But Saji was never put in prison or was ever arrested for his crime. Because his parents were both super rich and paid the police to not put their son Saji on a criminal record. His parents also pay the victims to kept quiet and not let it leak out in the public eyes. So, all this time, I had a serial rapist in my peerage. I reincarnated an offender as my pawn and let you join the student council, Sona said in a bitter voice, slowly losing her cool. And not only that. 2, I'll let you touch me every day. I let you follow me into the toilet and wipe my for me, play with my small tiny when we made love to each other, and let you me every night. I was planned on having your babies. Sona's whole face twisted into an ugly scowl, her face turning demonic looking, turning red in color and a sinister crimson red glint in her eyes, and water magic summoning in her right palm of her hand. You dirty, fifthly rapist bastard of a bitch. I'm going to make you pay for this, Sona yelled out in a demonic voice. You tainted my cute and adorable baby sister, Sona-chan, with your dirty, unclean rapist hands and body. Sarah Fall roared out in rage in a demonic tone of voice. Her whole face turning demonic looking, her face turning bright red in anger, and her eyes turning black in color. Sona-chan, let both of us torture this disgusting mother yar, Sarah Fall shouted out. Sona nodded to her older sister words, as they walked toward the blonde pawn with murder in their eyes. Saji shrank away in fear from both sisters. He was terrified and shaking in his boot. He was sweating all over his body. Saji did one thing he could. He ran. Saji bolted out of the door of student council clubroom, running out of the school building and running as fast as he could to get away from both his master and her older sister. Rage and fury. Sona, Tsubaki, Momo, Rhea, Ruruko, Tsubasa, Tomo, Benia, Lu, and her older sister Sarah Fall all chase after Saji. Rias along with Akino, Kiba, Zenobia, Kaneko, and Asia also joined in on the chase. Saji ran through the street of Kutown, with Sona, her peerage members, her older sister Sarah Fall, and Rias and her peerage members behind him. Sona summoned her water-based magic, sending her attack which then transformed into a long snake, and the water-like snake flew towards Saji, whose eyes had winded in horror, as sweats began to pour down his head. But lucky for him, he avoids the water snake by dodging out of the way. Saji hopping back to avoid a swing from Tsubaki Master Naginata's sword. Rias started sending balls of power of destruction at Saji. The blood pawn managed to dodge out of the way. Akino started sending holy lighting toward the Saji. But Saji once again managed to dodge out of the way. Both Sona peerages and Rias peerages each tried to attack Saji, but he managed to dodge most of the attack each time out of fear for his safety. The blonde pawn ran faster as his legs could carry him. Soon Saji was out of Kutown, never to be seen again. 4 days later, Saji was now in the middle of nowhere. He didn't know which part of town he was in. The blonde pawn had escaped Kutown with his life. He had been hiding in this part of town for a 4 day now. Hi Saji. Fancy seeing you here. Saji eyes winded, as he heard a familiar voice, and turned around and couldn't believe at what he was seeing. There stood Issei Hyoudou standing behind him with a small smirk on his face. Long time no see, Saji. Issei said, still with the same small smirk on his face. Saji's eyes nearly pop out of his head in shock and was speechless. How was Issei still alive? Surzex had killed the form pawn by torturing him to death. So, how was Issei alive? Saji just didn't understand. Just to let you know, Saji. I am the one who sent those documents to Sona. That how your master found out your dark little secrets about being offenders and rapists. And information regarding how your parents pay off the police and victims to keep this out of the public eye. After I done some deep digging about your past, I decided to share it with Sona, the woman you were deeply in love with. Issei said with a smile on his face. Saji was no longer shocked about Issei being alive anymore, as anger was boiling up inside him. He now turns to face Issei with a thunderous expression on his face. You bastard! You ruined my life! You turned Sona and everybody against me. Now Sona, along with her older sister, my comrades, and Rias and her peerages now want to kill me, and I now had to live here in this unknown place. I got nothing now because of you, Saji shouted out in rage, as his eyes turned bloodshot red in color, and his face turned demonic looking. His face no longer looked like a human as it now resembles a demon. Saji was clenching his fist in pure anger. Now you know what it like to be betrayed by everyone who you thought love and care about you. Now you know what it like to be me. You betray me like everyone else did, and now you are getting your comeuppance for yours betray. It called karma, bitch, Issei said calmly with a small smirk on his face. And besides, everybody now knows your dark little secret. That you are nothing but a sick, twisted, dirty rapist scumbag that should have been put in jail a long time ago. Saji glared at Issei with load of anger, venom, and hatred inside of him, and a deadly black aura around his body. Issei just smiled evilly. What the matter? Did I hit a nerve, rapist scumbag? You are going to pay for this. Die, Hyoudou. Die! Saji yelled out, as he charges at Issei with his fists coated in black key and murder in his eyes. I'm going to rip your heart apart, you bastard piece of shit. Saji yelled out in rage. Saji's fist flew and tried to land a punch, but Issei dodged out of the way. Saji grit his teeth in anger and tried to kick him, but Issei blocks his kick and grabbed his feet. Issei then twisted his foot back and kicked him in the stomach with such force that he ended up flying backward and hitting a nearby tree. Issei waited for him to get back up. Saji once again tried to attack Issei and jumped forward and tried to punch Issei again. But once again Issei dodged the punch, moving to the other side. Issei began to give a barrage of punch towards Saji. After Saji's intense barrage of blows, Issei gave the final blow to Saji's face, with a bone-cracking punch to the face. Saji went crashing toward the ground with a hard thud toward a tree. Saji was knocked out cold. When Saji wake up, both of his arms were tied with thick ropes, but his feet were free. He looks around the place to find himself in an abandoned warehouse with a green light on. You are finally awake? Saji saw Issei standing behind him with a smirk on his face. Before Saji could say a word, Issei suddenly punched Saji in the head about 6 times, and a kick to his stomach that Saji was sent flying backward and hitting a wall. The blonde pawn felt his back break, and let out a loose scream of pain. Saji began to choke, spitting blood out of his. Issei walked toward him, got out a knife and began to slice of Saji's fingers one by one. Saji screamed in pain, as blood leaked out of his now fingerless hands. You know, I really enjoy hearing you screaming in so much pain, as it like music to my ear. Issei said with a sadist smirk on his face. Issei stabbed Saji's leg with the knife. Saji let out a scream of pain and started wetting his pants in fear. You're that really disgusted to wet your pants like that? I think I will need to teach you a lesson in manner, Issei said with a cruel smile on his face. Issei stabbed his other leg as he saw Saji tried to run away from him. Oh no, you don't. You are not getting away from me that easily. Issei took the knife from Saji's leg. He drew the knife up in the air. He then brought the knife straight down to where Saji's manhood was, and stabs in his manhood. There was now blood leaking out of Saji's manhood, and dripping onto the ground. Saji clutched his manhood, in so much pain, and began coughing violently, as his eyes were winded so much, that they were about pop out of his head. Issei wasn't done, as he then stabbed the knife into Saji's left eye. Saji began to scream loudly in pain, as he could feel blood liquids leaking out of his left eye socket, and dripping down his neck. Issei grabbed a hold of Saji's head and smashed his face against the stone floor multiple times until his whole face was bleeding horribly, and his face bone broken. My three-ing face! Oh, Jesus Christ! Issei began to laugh at Saji pain and stomping on his left legs, breaking his leg bone. Saji once again screamed in pain. He then chops off Saji's right arm clean right off his shoulder. Blood pouring out of the wound like a waterfall. 6 hours of torturing the shit out of his former friend and rival. Issei was now bored and decided to just end Saji's life. Before you die by my hands, I will tell you how I am still alive. So, Issei came close to Saji's ear, and whispered into his ear and told him how he was once alive again. Saji's eyes were winded like a bowling ball. Before he could say anything, Issei then stabs the knife into Saji's heart. Saji felt the unbearable pain shooting through his heart. Saji could see the light flash in his eyes. His dark past enters his mind as being an evil rapist. How he had raped a few girls with no remorse whatsoever. Hey girls. I'm going to enjoy every minute of our special time together. Now remove your clothes at once or I just remove them for you, Saji said with a sick, dark sadist rapist grin on his face, as he underdresses the two girls, and start ing their neck with. The two girls felt disgust and had tears in their eyes, remembering their fear of him, and left the two girls he rapes, and left them in despair and broken. Saji went on to commit more horrific act on each girl he met without remorse or guilt in his heart. One time he pretended to befriend a girl so to gain her and her family trust. Once he had gained their trust, he casually murders the girl family in front of her eyes by setting the house on fire with them still inside. The girl family could be heard screaming as they were burned alive. Ah ha 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 ha, how boring. All your shitty family did was die. Weak, ha 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 ha. Saji mock and laugh evilly as he watches his victims burning in the fire with a cold, demonic grin on his face. Saji then stabs the girl with a knife in her stomach, wounded her, and then slit her the girl's throat. Saji then watched the girl slowly drop to the ground, blood dripping from her slit throat. Saji watched the girl slowly dies in front of him. A memory of when he abused his own two young sisters. Oh, so tight, so soft. This is great. As Saji stop this. Please be big brother. And no more. We are begging you. Shut the up. Saji shout out with a sneer on his face, and backhanding his younger sisters hard across the face. He throws one of his younger sisters to the ground. Walk over to her and begin stomping her face into the ground until she was bleeding and injured. With his other sister, he twisted her ankle until her bone broke, causing her to scream and cry out in pain. Saji just smiled evilly the whole time. How Saji had gotten away with the sick things he had done in the past. How he raped so many girls he met during his past. How he murders about 4 girls, killed one of the girl family members. He continues his daily life as a normal high school student, and went unpunished for so long. Karma had finally caught up to him, and now he was getting what he deserves. Saji slowly began to close his left eyes for the last time. As Saji laid on the ground slowly dying, Issei lit up a match and threw it to Saji's dead lifeless body. The fire slowly burning his body. Issei then left his dead body there to burn into ashes and disappear into the cold night. The next day, when everybody found out about the death of Genshiro Saji, no one didn't even give a shit about his death, or were surprised about his sudden death. Sona just didn't seem to care one bit about her former pawn death, and just carried on like nothing happened. The rest of her peerage also didn't seem to care either. Not even his own family even care about his death either. No one mourned his death, and no one remember him. Saji was now completely forgotten. No one gave a shit about his death. The underworld. Kaneko, Kuroka, I brought you another Nekomate to join your race. Her name is Tekachi, Surzek said as he walks over to the 2 Nekomate sisters with a friendly smile on his face. Another following Nekomate with blue hair, green eyes, and normal size stood behind Surzek with a nervous expression on her face. Who was like Kaneko, and Kuroka had cat ears that were blue, and 2 blue cat tails. This made Kuroka happy to see another Nekomate alongside them. Even though Kaneko had a stoic expression on her face, inside her she was also happy and glad to have another of her kind joining her and her sister's side. Naya, what can she do? I will test her by fighting against her to see how strong and skillful she is, Kuroka said as she got up and walked toward Tekachi. Surzek gave the blue-hair Nekomate a warm smile. Go on, Tekachi, show Kuroka what you can do. The blue-hair Nekomate was still nervous, but smiled a bit when she saw Surzek's friendly smile toward her. Tekachi went over toward her other following Nekomate, and to test her skills against her. Later, after the fight with Tekachi to test how strong she was, Kuroka had won the fight easily without even breaking a sweat. Naya, this bitch is weak as hell, Kuroka said coldly, and looked at the other Nekomate in utter disgust and disappointment. You are right, big sister. Kaneko also agreed with her big sister. That fight was so shameful for you, big sis. She an embarment to our Nekomate race. We don't need weakling like her to join us, our once-pound race. This ing bitch don't deserve to breath the same air as us, Chiron. I can't bear to even look at this trash, Kuroka said harshly, and not even once caring about hurting Tekachi feeling. The big black-hair Nekomate young woman just glares at the other Nekomate with hatred on her face. I also agree. Both my older sister and I want a strong Nekomate like us, and not a weak patty bitch like her, Kaneko said with venom, and glared at the girl with a look of disgust. Kuroka walked toward the hurt blue-hair Nekomate, and violently pushed her, causing her to fall on the ground, and cutting her forearm. Blood began to drip from the wound. When she saw her following Nekomate suddenly pull out a knife from her black kimono, survival instinct kicked in. Tekachi turned to run away, but she didn't get a chance to run, as Kaneko threw a powerful senjutsu blast of energy at her, knocking her off her feet. Thanks, Chiron, Kuroka said with an evil smirk on her face. You are welcome, big sister. Kaneko replied back, and gave a small evil smirk back of her own. Kuroka grabbed Tekachi by the wrist, and pulled her toward her, before slamming her down onto her knee. Tekachi felt a bruising pain in her ribs. Desperately, she tried to free herself, but the big black-haired Nekomata was insanely strong. She frantically tried to pull away, her eyes trained on the small but sharp-looking knife in her following Nekomate hand. Kuroka began slicing off each of Tekachi's fingers one by one. The blue-haired Nekomate began to scream in pain, as she could feel hot, wet blood dripping off her fingerless fingers. Saji and Kaneko did absolutely nothing, and just stood there, and stared with a motionless expression on their faces. You waste me, and my little sister, Chiron time for being so weak, and patty. We were so happy at getting another Nekomate to join our race, and to bloom the Nekomate race. But instead, we got nothing but a weakling. Kuroka hissed out angrily, and sliced off her two tails, causing her to scream in pain. After Kuroka was done, Tekachi was crying and in tears as she looks at her bloodied fingerless fingers, and tails that were on the ground. Kuroka looks down at the other Nekomate in disgust, and showing no remorse for her actions. She then made her way over to Saji and looked at him in the eyes. Just get rid of her, and out of faces already. I can't stand to look at this shameless bitch any longer, Kuroka said harshly. Saji turned his head to stare at the crying, blue-haired Nekomate. But there was no kindness in his eyes. His blue-green eyes were filled with coldness, cruelness, and disgust in them. Tekachi felt a chill go down her spine. The blue-haired Nekomate quickly got up off the ground, and slowly took a few steps backward. She felt her heart pounding with fear. Saji walked toward her slowly with a menacing smirk on his face. Before Tekachi could make a run for it, she was suddenly pushed forward by a sudden blast of crimson power of deduction, sending her flying up into the air, and then dropped down onto the ground with a hard thud. She felt in so much pain and agony as her left arm broke in half. Saji then walks towards a whimpering, trembling, blue-haired Nekomate that was lying on the ground. She couldn't move from being in so much pain. He grabs her by the head, and then throws her back forward again, causing her face to slam into the wall. She let a blood-curdling scream of utter pain. Her face was bloodied, and damaged with a few broken teeth falling out of her. Ah-ha-ha-ha-ha. 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 Saji began to laugh sadistically at his handed work on this weakling. The crimson-haired devil steps on the Tekachi shoulder, and prepares to press his foot down on it. He presses his foot down on her shoulder, causing her shoulder bone to break. She let out a scream, and felt the pain running down her shoulder. Oh, I do love the sound of your scream. You don't know what it feel like. You don't know how it get me off. Hearing your screams, and knowing that I have the power of a god, no one can stop me from beating the living shit out of you, Saji said with an evil smirk on his face. Dark shadow covered half of his face. His blue eyes turned red, showing his sadism and evilness that was inside of his heart. The Crimson Devil King then sprints toward the helpless Nekomate, and slammed his growing fist that was coated with ki against her, knocking her backward toward a wall. After that he continued to beat her black and blue, showing no remorse one bit. Saji was nothing but an evil, manipulative, ruthless, and corrupt tyrant who had hid his cruelness and evilness over thousands of years with a friendly smile and nice guy act. He was showing his true color toward this hapless Nekomate that was lying on the ground, beaten, lot of wounds covering her whole body, and coughing up blood from her. The crimson-haired Satan showing a willingness to act dishonestly in return for someone with great power that he could use for his own benefits, his own greedy, his selfishness, and personal gains something out of it. He had used Issei for his power, his sacred gear that hosts the Red Dragon Drake, and didn't once care or gave a shit about Issei one bit. But now that he had lost his sacred gear, then that meant that he was no longer used to them. He was doing the same thing with this Nekomata girl since finding out she nothing but a weakling. There was no room for weakling in this world. That is why he was teaching her a lesson for wasting his time. Surzex had everyone fools. The only people that knew about his evilness were his parents, his best friend Ajuka, one of the members of the 4 great Satans, along with Seraphal, Riser and his family, Azazel, Michael and his angels, his little sister Rias, and her peerage members. Yes, even Asia now known but didn't care as she stuck up to Surzeshes and started ing his. Sona and her peerage members also knew, as they're stuck up to Surzeshes, ing his, and treating him like he was the best thing in the world. The Vala team also knew as well. Surzex then violently rips Tekachi's stomach open with his hands that was coated with his crimson magic. She screams in utter pain and agony. The crimson hair man rips the blue hair Nekomata intestines right out of her stomach. He then drops her intestines onto the floor. That must really hurt, doesn't it? Surzex asks as he grins evilly at her pain. Kuroka and Kaneko look on with a lack of empathy on their expressions. They didn't show any remorse at seeing Surzex torturing and beaten their following Nekomata brutally, because she was weak and didn't have much talent. So, she was worthless to them, and nothing but a waste of space. Same her right for being so weak, worthless, and patty. She deserved what coming to her. That bitch can just die for all we care. They both though in their head coldly, and showing no concern for her one bit. Kuroka and Kaneko just stare on with blank expressions. The poor and beaten Nekomata lie there on the ground, bleeding from all her wounds, and coughing up blood. Prepared to die. You worthless weakling! Surzeshes shouted, as he got ready to end this weakling life once and for all. The Crimson Devil King used his giant power of destruction at the wounds, and beaten Tekachi. She screams as she was now completely eliminated from exist. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Kuroka said in a cold and heartless tone of voice. Kaneko then looked at Surzeshes with a stoic expression. Surzex same. Next time make sure to bring a stronger and talent Nekomata like us to join our race. And not a ing weak, patty bitch like her, Kaneko said with the same stoic expression on her face. She didn't even once care at what happened to the hapless Nekomata. Don't worry, Kaneko, Kuroka. I won't make that mistake again. I will not fail you again. Next time I check before bring a patty weakling like that bitch to you guys again, Surzeshes said with a smile on his face. The 2 sisters just nodded their heads as Surzeshes left. 3 days later, the Hyoudous, Rias, Akino, Kiba, Kaneko, Asia, Zenobia, Irina, and Azazel were all in the living room having a wonderful dinner that was cooked by Mrs. Hyoudou. Rosweiss and Gasper weren't back from their training trip yet. Nobody had told them about the betrayed or death of Issei Hyoudou. Rias and Akino both were sitting next to the blonde prince, Kiba, and having their large push against his shoulder making the blonde knight blush a little. Asia and Zenobia were both missing their silver-haired Prince Vala, and wish he was here with them. Having him holding them in his arms or ing them. Zenobia was planning on having Vala getting her pregnant with strong babies. She couldn't wait to finally give birth to a child. Zenobia was the main girl in Vala little harem, with Asia being the second, and Kuroka being the third. She knew that Kuroka was also planning to have Vala get her pregnant. But Zenobia was going to be the first girl to get pregnant by him. Kuroka would just have to wait in line and being the third to have Valley babies. Suddenly there was a loud banging at the door. Mr. Hyoudou decided to answer the door. Standing out in the street was an elderly woman and a middle-aged man who a couple older than Mr. Hyoudou. They both were dressed in blue, black, and white traditional Japanese attire. There were also a few men dressed in black suits behind them. Mr. Hyoudou looked surprised, and warily eyed the golden-sheathed sword that the middle-aged old man had in his hand. Mother-in-law and brother-in-law? What are you both doing here? He asked. Where's is my daughter? The elderly woman demanded coldly, and glared at Mr. Hyoudou in disgust. She's inside, Mr. Hyoudou replied. We're having dinner, so, hey. The elderly woman didn't give Mr. Hyoudou a chance to finish as she shoved him to the side. Out of my way, she said as she stepped inside, followed by her son, and the group of men in black suits that was behind them. Hey, mother-in-law, this is my home. Mr. Hyoudou shouted out angrily. You can't just come barging in here like this. The elderly woman, her oldest son, and the men dressed in black suits ignored Mr. Hyoudou patriarch. Both the elderly woman and son along with the men in black suits strode into the dining room, where Rias, and her peerage, Irina, and Azazel were seated and having dinner. Darling, Mrs. Hyoudou looked up and found herself face to face with her elderly mother, and standing behind her was her older brother along with the men in black suits. Mrs. Hyoudou saw that her two family members did not look very happy with her at the moment. Kiba paled at the sight of the older man's sword. After all, he could sense that the sword was very powerful, and leaking powerful aura from it. Mother. Brother. What are you doing here? Mrs. Hyoudou asked in shock at seeing them. I would like to speak with my daughter alone, the elderly woman said in a tone that showed she was not in the mood to argue as she ignored her daughter's question. Excuse me, Rias said in, and looked quite annoyed, but you can't come charging in here like you own the place. This is Mrs. Hyoudou home, and our home as WLL. My family remodeled this place, so you can't just come in here like yo. The elderly woman turned to Rias with a stone-cold stare that made even the Princess of Destruction flinch. I wasn't talking to you, little red-haired girl. I am here to speak with my daughter, and I'm not going to listen to some spoiled, stuck-up, and self-righteous princess like you. Now stay out of my way, bitch, the elderly woman said harshly, and rudely, and stared at Rias in utter annoyed and disgust. Rias was complete shocked and had her wide and open like a fist out of water. She was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. This made the crimson-haired princess very angry and pissed off. How dare this old bitch speak to her like that? She was the crimson-haired princess of the Gremory family, and the younger sister of one of the Devil King. Everyone but my bitch of a daughter out now. We can talk in the kitchen, Mrs. Hyoudou replied. The elderly woman stepped to the side, allowing Mrs. Hyoudou to lead her to the kitchen. When the Gremory group, Irina, Mr. Hyoudou, and Azazel tried to follow, the older brother of Mrs. Hyoudou stopped them. This is a family matter. Stay out of this, and mind your own business, he ordered coldly, and stared at each of them with the cold looks in his eyes. Who do you think you are? To tell us what to do, you trash? Why don't you go yourself, you worthlesser? Kaneko said rudely, and glared at the middle-aged man. Watch who you talking to, flathead bitch. The older brother warns with a death glare on his face. Kaneko glared at him in anger, and clenched her small fist. She so badly wanted to snap this bastard neck, and break every bone in his body. You may think you are tough, and a bad little girl, but you are nothing compares to me, you little egotistical midget. I would have killed your flat lowly in second, he said with a dark look on his face. This made Kaneko so angry and got her blood boiling. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She clenches her small fists, and glare at the man in utter rage. Rias glared at this middle-aged man in anger. How dare this bastard talk to one of her servants like that? A sinister crimson aura was now leaking out of her whole body. Akino, Kiba, Zenobia, and even Asia and Irina herself glare at this middle-aged man. How dare he speak to their Kaneko like that? Like Rias, there also had a sinister aura leaking out of their bodies. Don't you dare talk to one of my savants like that, you arrogant pig! Rias yelled out, as her whole face twisted in anger. Shooting a cold look at the middle-aged man. Apologize to my Kaneko, or you will regret ing with the Gremory family. Because I will make your life a living hell. You and your mother will suffer the consequences of your action. But I will make you personally suffer an even worse pain that you can imagine. Rias threatened with a death glare, as there was a harsh shadow underneath her eyes. A little sinister aura seeping out of her body a bit. How dare you be so rude and nasty to Konik-chan? If God of the Bible was still alive right now, he would punish you, and making you suffer in terrible pain for your rudeness to an innocent girl. Your sins of both you and your mother entering without permission from your sister, or us for that matter. None of us gave you permission to be here, Irina said, and giving the middle-aged man a disappointed look. Rias and Irina were both looking at him in shame, and making him out to be the bad guy. Even though that Kaneko was the one who started the fight between them in the first place. The older brother just looked at the self-proclaiming angel with a look of annoyed. Shut the you annoying airhead. God of the Bible is dead, so, get the over bitch, and stop speaking your religion's crap. You are actually already giving me a headache with all the shit that come out of your God is nothing but a tyrant that killed thousands of innocent peoples over his own selfishness and greed. He was no different from that evil bastard Satan. I really couldn't care less about your God or you for that matter. Your God of the Bible, and shove it straight up your. The older brother said rudely. Irina gasped in shock and couldn't believe what she was hearing. The self-proclaiming angel had her wide and open. She then gave the man a dirty look. How dare he be so rude to her, and to talk such crap about her dead god of the Bible like that? She was the angel of Michael Same, and the ace of spades. The self-proclaiming angel seethed in anger, and grit her teeth. She wanted to summon her light spear, and shove it straight up his, making him beg for mercy. But the older brother had already lost interest in her, and turned to face Rias with a cold look. Actually, Miss Gremory, you're the arrogant one, you spoil, stuck-up princess. You think you are so powerful, and a strong leader, giving out your little threat. You are weak as hell compares to someone like me, bitch. But you are nothing but an unfit leader and master to your servants. There was a string of gasps around the living room until there was a strong and powerful aura leaking and seeping out of the crimson-hair princess. How dare you! I am a great leader and master to my servants. And I am not weak. Rias shouted out furious. That was a low hit to her pride. She wanted to hurt this bastard and make him take back those words. Oh, really, when you allowed fallen angels into your territory without doing anything? Oh, silly me. Of course you let those group of murderous fallen angels go running around in your territory. It was the only way to get my nephew, Issei, to join your peerage by having him get killed by that evil and murderous fallen angel bitch, Rainier. Rias and the others like Akino, Kiba, Kaneko and Azazel were quite shocked by what he had just said. How did he know about that? How did he knows about the fallen angel, Rainier? All because you were too much of a selfish and greedy bitch to even just ask Issei to join your peerage without getting him killed. You just use him for your own benefits, and toss him aside like garbage once he was no longer useful to you guys anymore. Hell, you use your own arrogant, greedy, and prideful nature as an excuse to avoid training yourself to become a great leader and master to your own servants, to become stronger for yourself. Because when something involved becoming better in your powers, or trying to fix your own servants' tragic pasts, but oh, no, you had to have Issei the new guy fix their problems instead. Because you were too busted just thinking about yourself all the time. But no, when it also involved the relationship, you start crying like the self-righteous bitch that you are. I mean, look at how your servants all turned out, the middle-aged man said, as he then faces the whole ORC. Your sadist-masochist queen is willing to throwing away her dignity just like that, to avoid a spoiled princess like you from marrying to some pervy, chicken playboy named Razor. Willing to including becoming nothing but a slave, and toy just for your sake, just to help a friend, but going so far to humiliate her own self, and offer herself is just shameful, embarrassing, and in bad taste. I'm thinking that she is possible a drug addict. I mean, nobody is that happy all the time, and can keep on smiling like that. That is just not normal, and kind of up. Your knight is also probably a drug addict as well. Just smiling over everything that is kind of creepily, and really up. I also thinking that he actually a secret homo, lying to himself and loving you and your queen, and is just in the closet. I think that he a secret psychopath underneath that smile, and other men behind you and your queen back. He is nothing but a loyalty dog to you, and a yes man that willing to do anything you say, and probably jump off a cliff if you told him to. Since he has no mind of his own, your blonde bishop is a block, and a naive girl that willing to copy everything you do. She stuck up to you, and treating you like you are the greatest thing in the world. Your other knight is a dumb, and probably have no brain cell in that empty head of her, your Damfer bishop. Instead of trying to fix Yuvikamori's servant problems, and trying to contain his powers, but you instead locker him in a sealed room, without doing a thing to help him. You manipulative your silver-haired rook to joining your peerage. After she was going through an emotional trauma of being abandoned by Odin, and certainly, and lastly your white-haired underdeveloped dwarf of a rook bitch lowly over there, that believes the world revolves around her, and if you don't her lowly then you're shit to her, called every male's pervert, take her anger out on an innocent male just to make her egotistical self feel good about herself. She nothing but a self-absorbed, nasty, thug, and abusive little girl who think that she's such a bad, and just use others as her punching bag just because of her rook strengths. But she nothing but a weak little girl without that rook strengths chess piece inside of her. If we were in a fight, I would just easily beat that flat Ed lowly in second without breaking a sweat, the older brother said, a bit of smugness seeping into his voice. Kaneko was seethed in anger and rage. She glares at the middle-aged man in utter hatred in her hazel eyes. She could feel her blood boiling, as she clenches her fists, and shaking in rage. A sinister aura was leaking out of her a bit. How dare this trash talk shit about her master, and her friends like that? Right, that it. She was going to beaten this bastard to a pulp, and him beg for mercy, before Kaneko about to step forward, and teach this bastard not to with her or bad her master, and friends. Azazel stopped her by putting a hand on her shoulder, and stepped forward himself, glaring at the older brother. Do you honestly think these devils, the angel girl, and myself, a powerful and strong fallen angel, is going to listen to some mere human trash like you, or you buddies for that matter? Ha ha, don't make me laugh. Like any of us is going to listen to the amount of shit that come out of your... Everything you just said in garbage, Azazel said with a sneer, and arrogance seeping into his tone. That right, we are going to follow them if you like it or not. Now get of our way, bastard. Kiba also put in his 2 cents. When it looked like that Azazel, Kaneko, Kiba, Rias, Aquino, Asia, Zenobia, and Irina wasn't going to listen, the older brother along with the other men in black suits drew out their swords, which had the desired effect of stopping the 7 teenagers and fallen angel adults in their tracks. They could feel the strong aura leaking out of those swords. They all felt chills running down their bodies. They were all cornered by the men in black suits. The older brother of Mrs. Hyoudou drew a line across the silver wooden floor as he guarded the kitchen's entrance along with the men in black suits. Cross this line, and you all die by our hands, he warned with a death glare. Rias stepped forward, an angry and piss-off expression on her face. Who do you think you are? You bastard. To give us order like this. Do you know who I am? I am Rias Gremory of the House of Gremory, the crimson-haired ruined princess of destruction. My older brother is the Crimson Satan, and one of the leaders of the 4 Great Devil King. The middle-aged man just raised an eyebrow, and just stared at Rias in utter annoyed, as she counted ranting on. This is your sister home. Our home. You, your mother, and your group of men all don't have permission to be here. You have no right to. She was cut off as the older fallen angel yanked her back as the older brother made an attempt to decapitate Rias. Do as he say, Azazel concurred. He and the men in black suits are very deadly with these swords. It's nice to see that you took my warning seriously, the older brother said with a smug smirk on his face. Azazel narrowed his violet eyes. I only worried that your buddies might bring harm to those young devils, Mr. Hyoudou and Irina, while I am fighting you. If Rias and her peerage, Mr. Hyoudou and Irina, weren't here right now, I would have easily killed you and your buddies with my dark light spear projection in second, Azazel said with a scowl on his face. The older brother just looked at the older fallen angel with a mocking smirk on his face. Whatever you say, former governor of the fallen angels, Azazel glared at the human man with pure hatred on his face. He wanted so badly to wipe that mocking smirk of his face. He wanted to rip his throat open, and rip out his body part one by one, making this human scumbag suffer in pain. But if he made one move, then Risa and her peerage along with Mr. Hyoudou and Irina would be killed by the men in black suits. So, he had no choice but do as the older brother say. Inside the kitchen, Mrs. Hyoudou faced her elderly mother. Mother, what are you doing? He slaps. Mrs. Hyoudou was cut off as her elderly mother had slapped her hard across the face, sending her flying onto the floor. Outside the living room, the slaps were heard. But nobody could do anything about it. The elderly mother grabbed a handful of Mrs. Hyoudou by her shirt, pulling her daughter close that she was in her face. You betrayed and abandoned your only son, my grandson, just because he lost his sacred gear. You were supposed to be on his side as his mother, but no, you just sided with them over your own son, and abandoned him. And not only that, you didn't even show any sadness when he was killed by that bastard Serzex, the mother said, bitterness and anger. Mrs. Hyoudou was shocked. She was thinking, how did she know all about her son being killed by Serzex? How did she also knew about the betrayal of her son? Mrs. Hyoudou began to whimper, as blood trickling from her badly busted lip. Issei had always been useless and worthless to us since the day he was born. Issei is no use to anybody without the red dragon inside of him. He no longer has any honor in himself. So, he nothing but trash to everybody and the whole Hyoudou family of my husband. He is nothing but a poor excuse for a son. I'm so glad that Serzex had killed that piece of shit called our son. And I couldn't care less that he is now DA. Slaps. Mrs. Hyoudou earned another hard slap to the face by her angry elderly mother. The mother then begins to viciously slap, and then punches Mrs. Hyoudou repeatedly until her whole face was a bloody mess. You evil, heartless bitch, the elderly mother roared out in anger. Her whole face was now completely red in anger, and a vein was pushing in her head. How could you say that about your own son? Your own flea and blood? You think that give you a right to abandon your only son? My grandson, just because he no longer has the red dragon and his sacred gear. What is wrong with you? You, heatless cow. You are a terrible mother, the elderly mother screamed out in her daughter's face, and smack her daughter so hard that she ending up falling onto the ground with a hard thud, cutting her forehead, as blood leak out from the wounds. Mother, calm down. Remember your heart, and why we are here in the first place. The older brother reminded her from the open doorway. He was not taking his eyes away from Rias and her peerage, Irena, Mr. Hyoudou, and Azazel. The elderly mother took several minutes to calm herself down, but she was still pissed off and angry at her daughter's actions against her grandson. You are nothing but a neglectful and verbally abusive mother. You away let your bastard of a husband physical and emotional abuse your own son. If your father was still alive right now, he would be so disappointed in having an evil bitch a daughter. I bet he probably rolling in his grave, the elderly woman said angrily, and looking down at her daughter like she was trash. You are no daughter of mine. As far as we are concerned, your older brother and the others no longer has a younger sister, and I no longer have a daughter, the elderly mother said coldly. Mrs. Hyoudou was standing back up on her feet, and felt so hurt by her mother's cold words. She felt her heart was being stabbed repeatedly by her mother's harsh words. I will leave you nothing in my will when the day I died. Because I can just see the ugliness in your soul. There is no goodness in your heart. You and your husband are both pure evil. And I can see that you nothing but an evil, cruel and cold heartless middle-aged woman. All the money will be going to your older brother, 2 older sisters, and the rest will be going to a few charity organizations. The mother counted to berate her heartless daughter. It should have been you, who died instead of our lovely grandson, Issei. I wish it was you who was killed. She hisses out with venom in her voice, and look at her daughter with hatred. Mrs. Hyoudou gasped, as she felt her heart break by her mother's harsh words. She felt tears in her eyes, and began to sob, crying her eyes out. I hate you, and want nothing more to do with you. You are no longer welcome to visit us anymore. You are now dead to me. If you ever step on our door again, you will die by our hands. Oh, and don't bother coming to my funeral when the day I died, because if you do, your older brother and the rest of our family will torture you to death, and made it look like an accident. The elderly woman threatened with a dark and sinister look on her face. Mrs. Hyoudou was sobbing uncontrollably. The elderly mother took one final look at her daughter, and spat in her sobbing daughter's face before turning on her heel, and walk out from the kitchen. The older brother and the men in black suits sheathed their swords, and follow after the elderly woman. Departing from the Hyoudou residence without a single word, Rias and her peerage, Mr. Hyoudou, Irena, and Azazel were all in a state of shock of the whole event between Mrs. Hyoudou and her mother. And how did the older brother know everything about the whole ORC, and their betrayal of Issei? Rias, Aquino, Irena, and Asia made their way over to the sobbing middle-aged woman who now was sitting on the kitchen floor, holding her knee in her hands. The 4 young females tried their best to comfort the sobbing Mrs. Hyoudou, along with her husband who tried his best to cheer her up. 2 weeks later, it had now been about 2 weeks since Mrs. Hyoudou was disowned, and now hated by her mother and older brother, leaving the middle-aged woman to wallow in her own misery, self-pity, and deep depressed. Since that events with her mother and older brother, Mrs. Hyoudou had become a broken woman, and lost complete meaning of her life. Her and her mother got on so great, and were like the best of friends, even like more sisters than mother and daughter. But now having her beloved mother, her older brother, and the rest of the family hating her, made her feel empty inside. She was not allowed to come to her mother's funeral when she will soon die. Because if she did, her older brother and the others would torture her to death and get away with murder. She couldn't get the harsh words from her mother out of her head. It should have been you, who died instead of our lovely grandson, Issei. I wish it was you who was killed. I hate you, and want nothing more to do with you. You are no longer welcome to visit us anymore. You are now dead to me. If you ever step on our door again, you will die by our hands. Oh, and don't bother coming to my funeral when the day I died, because if you do, your older brother and the rest of our family will torture you to death, and made it look like an accident. Mrs. Hyoudou hasn't left her bedroom for 2 weeks. Her husband and the girls had to bring her breakfast, lunch, and dinner up to her room, as she wouldn't even come downstairs anymore. The next 2 days, that evening at 4:00 p.m., Mr. Hyoudou had finished his day at work, and was walking out of a shop, and heading straight toward home. When out of nowhere, someone threw a sack over his head. Waha! Mr. Hyoudou was in complete shock. He tried to scream, and fight the person off. The unseen person then punched Mr. Hyoudou in the stomach hard, sending the middle-aged old man to the ground. Mr. Hyoudou tried to reach for the sack that was blinding him. But he was once again punched in the stomach, then he was punched in the side of his head. He was then strangled until he falls unconscious on the cold, hard ground, and black out. What happened? Mr. Hyoudou thought to himself as he found that his was duct-tapped shut, and both of his arms were bound behind his back. He looks around and finds himself in a dark green empty dungeon. Where am I? Hello, father. A familiar and creepy voice greeted him as he instantly opened his eyes. Mr. Hyoudo's eyes were winded open in shock, and felt his heart frozen. Issei, he though in his head fearful and in complete shock. He felt his heart pounding in his. But how? Mr. Hyoudou searched for the voice that was his son but found nobody. It's so nice to see you again, father. The voice of Issei rang again, and this time, Mr. Hyoudou saw the familiar brown-haired young man walked out of the shadows. Issei, Mr. Hyoudou exclaimed to himself as his screams were muffled from the duct tape. This is not real. How is my son still alive? Was this some kind of joke? He's supposed to be dead, Mr. Hyoudou screamed inside his head. He was in complete shock and terror. He then saw a table to his left laid with sharp utensils and dissection tools, including a peeler. Hi, father! Issei exclaimed as he smiled creepily at his bastard of a father. I'm going to play a little game with you, father. Oh my God! Mr. Hyoudou screamed in his head as the young brown-haired man who he abuses and usually rape as a child now calmly walked towards him with a coldness in his eyes that made him shiver at the sight. Oh, sweet Jeje. No! I'm sorry! I'm sorry! Don't you hear me? I'm sorry! I'll do anything. I'm sorry for all the evil things that I had done to my son. Please! Mr. Hyoudou pleaded before a cold chuckle pulled him from his thoughts, as a sharp tingle of pain made his eyes jump to the dissecting tool slicing into his skin on his. Issei took the knife out from his pocket. I'm gonna go for the face. Issei came toward his tied-up father. Isn't this fun, father? Issei, please stop! Mr. Hyoudou screamed out of his mind as he saw the blade getting closer to his face. Issei placed the knife to the skin of the middle-aged man's face, as he began to peel his father's face like he was peeling an apple. He peeled the skin as Mr. Hyoudou screamed in agony and pain, as blood began drips down his face, which Issei ignored as he then cut off Mr. Hyoudo's nose. Whoops, got your nose, father. Hee hee. Issei teased as he held onto Mr. Hyoudo's nose as he laughed sadistically with a dark evil smirk on his face. My nose! Mr. Hyoudou screamed in thought as Issei continued to peel his face off as he grabbed the flesh of his father. Issei rubbed his own hands maniacally. Now I'm going to peel off the skin from your whole body. Issei exclaimed as he started to peel off the rest of Mr. Hyoudo's skin. Ah-ha-ha-ha-ha. Ah-ha-ha-ha-ha. Issei peeled all the skin off his evil bastard victim's arms. Issei now had a devious smirk on his face. Mr. Hyoudou felt his eyes watery and threatened to drop closed as the pain became almost unbearable. Issei then started to peel his legs and all Mr. Hyoudou could do was scream in pain as he watches his son did the peeling, as his skins become bloodied, and started bleeding violently. Please stop this. Oh, what was that, father? Issei questioned as he slowly begins to remove the duct tape from his bastard father. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the evil thing I did to you as a child. I'm sorry for abusing you since you were a child and sorry for raping you. I'm sorry for killing Asaki. Please no more. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mr. Hyoudou cried out in a blood-curdling scream. Tears filled his eyes and was shaking in complete fear. Oh, father. Issei sang as he gave off the creepiest of smiles. It's too late for the sorriest. No matter how much I tried to please you, and mother, no matter how much I tried to be close to you guys, to be a good son to you, and mother, to make you both proud of me. But it wasn't enough, now was it? Issei said as his expression then changed to anger and rage. He picked up a small wooden bat as he tapped it with his hand. You never once said a good word to me. All you ever did was physically, verbally, and emotionally abuse me since I was just a little kid, and rape me with no remorse whatsoever in your twisted, evil heart. The only thing that made you happy was to put me down along with that bitch mother of mine, and beaten me until I was in so much pain. Issei said in rage and fury. He glares at his father in utter hatred. Mr. Hyoudou was now in fright. He then thought back to the times where any time he had beaten his own son black and blue with no guilt whatsoever, how he had enjoyed making his only son suffer in so much pain, and hurting his feeling, causing his son to have low self-esteem for himself. Flashback. There was an 8-year-old Issei who had just come back home from school. Mr. Hyoudou was sitting in the living room watching TV. He was in a bad mood. Issei tried to go to his room and avoid being seen by his father. He knew that his father would take his anger out on him. He didn't want to go through another beating by his abusive father hands. Where do you think you are going, Issei? Issei froze in his spot. How did his father know that he was there? He made sure not to make a noise when he came through the door. Come here, Issei, Mr. Hyoudou said calmly. But there was a hint of anger in his voice. Issei didn't move a muscle. His small body was perpetually frozen in place, and sweat began to drip down his forehead. I said come here, you little shit! Mr. Hyoudou growled out in anger. He got out of his chair, and was now standing up. He was now in front of the young brown-hair boy, and pulled Issei by his hair. Please let me go, I haven't done anything. Whatever I did, I'm sorry, please don't hit me again please, Issei stammered out fearfully, and began crying. As tears began to drip down his face, Mr. Hyoudou looked at his 8-year-old son in utter disgust, annoyed, and hatred. He ignored the small boy's plea. Quit crying your petty little tears, you little piece of shit, he said with growing anger, and raised Issei to look into his angry brown eyes. Issei tried to shake his head, do something to reach his father, although he knew inside that it was hopeless. Another beating black and blue. Mr. Hyoudou lifted his hand, and punched Issei across the face, too many times to count. It was so rapid, Issei didn't have a chance to shed any more tears over his berries and bleeding cheekbone. Mr. Hyoudou dropped his only son to the floor like a piece of garbage. Issei bit his lip in pain, and trying not to let his cries leave his throat. Mr. Hyoudou looked down at his son in utter disgust and hatred on his face. He then kicked the 8-year-old viciously in his ribs before coming down to land a hard punch to his nose. Issei's nose was now broken, and blood began to flow from his nose. Anger boiled up inside of Mr. Hyoudou. Son of a bitch! He screamed as he continuously kicked Issei across the face and body. Issei began to cough, spitting up blood and mucus out of his. This did not go over well with Mr. Hyoudou at all. In fact, it made the brown-haired older man angrier. He looks at his son with utter hatred and disgust on his face. You dirty, smelly little bastard. Don't bleed all over the floor, shithead. Keep it bloody in, Mr. Hyoudou yelled out, and stomped on his son back, causing the young boy to cry out in pain. Mr. Hyoudou picked up his son, staring Issei in the eyes of his terrified son. Look at you, son. You are a disgusting, repulsive little boy. When you got older, no girl would ever love a patty, worthless loser like you, Mr. Hyoudou said coldly, and stared at his son in utter disgust. I'd wish that I had killed you at birth, when your mother gave birth to you, Mr. Hyoudou said harshly and bitterly. Issei felt his eyes filled with tears at his father's heartless words. Mr. Hyoudu's eyes slatted as he then slammed his son into the dining room table, breaking the table in half. He was filled with utter anger, and rage building up inside of him. With such powerful aura and anger leaking out of him, came power. He kicked and punched his son repeatedly, not once stopping. Issei started to whimper with each hit. He was powerless to do anything to stop his father's rage and abuse. Mr. Hyoudu's anger slowly dissipated, satisfied by the blood on his hands. He even asked the blood off his hands, and let out a sadist laugh at his son's pain. Issei lay a heap in a corner, after being thrown around like a common rag doll. Issei's vision was unfocused and his head started to spin. Blissful unconsciousness was approached rapidly. Why? Why does father hate me so much? Were the whispered words of the battered and abused brown-haired young boy, before falling unconsciousness. End of flashback. Please, I'm sorry. I'm SOR. Mr. Tuda was then cut off. Bang! Issei had whacked his father with his small wooden bat. Shut the up. I don't want to hear what you have to say anymore. You think you can just say sorry for all the evil things that you did to me as a child. You beat me when I was just an innocent child, you raped me, and killed my young sister, and betrayed me like everyone else did. Do you honestly think that I would just let you go after what you did to me over the years? And forgive you just like that? Issei said bitterly with disgust, and looked at his father with unfeeling eyes. What you did to me over the years is unforgivable, and you are nothing but a complete monster with no redeeming features. I am going to make you pay for all the evil things that you did to me in my childhood, and for your betrayed. Issei said darkly. Mr. Hyoudou looked at his son in fear, and started shaking. Don't worry. I'm not going to kill you. Well, not yet. I'll be back for you, and make you suffer some more. Issei said darkly, and stared at his father with a cold glare. Mr. Hyoudou flinched in fear, and felt sweats dripping down his skinless and bloodied face. You probably wondering how I'm still alive. I would love to stay, and tell you all about it. How I was brought back to live. But I'm going to visit 2 friends of mine. I tell you when I see you again. Issei said, and then left the room that his father was tied up in, and locked the door shut to the dungeon. Don't leave me in here! Mr. Hyoudou yelled out, but Issei just ignored him, and carried on walking. Later, Issei met up with Office and Great Red in the dimensional gap. When Office and Great Red hear about what happened to Issei, both dragon gods were enraged when they found out that Issei was betrayed by everyone from the devil's side, the fallen angel side, and the angel's side. Plus, by his own parents as well. They were helping Issei with his revenge. Issei had told his grandmother and uncle everything about the betrayed and how he was killed by Surzex during that time. How Rias had told him that she let him die by the fallen angel, Rainier. How his parents had disowned him, and how he was treated by them over the years. That was how the mother of Mrs. Hyoudou knew everything that happened to her grandson along with his uncle. Issei's grandmother was going to leave some money to her grandson in her will. What is your next plan? Office asked emotionless. Issei smirked a little. I'm going to carry on with planning my next revenge and begin the blood feud with everybody who had betrayed me, and who had turned their back on me, Issei said bitterly with growing anger inside of him. I was tricked into joining Rias' peerage when I was killed by that evil fallen angel bitch Rainier. Rias let me be killed just so she could have me as her servant, and to use me for my sacred gear power. Since I first joined the peerage, I was abused by that heartless lowly bitch Konkyo, and was always used as her punching bag to take her anger out on. I remember one time she stabs me in my eyes with a pen for just making a pervert remark. And she didn't even apologize for what she did. Issei said angrily. I was forced to solve everyone's problems just because Rias couldn't be bothered to do it herself. She was just a selfish bitch that didn't even seem to care about her servants' problems. I helped Rias with her married to Riser the scumbag, and fought teeth and nails to break off the married for that ungrateful crimson-haired bitch. I helped with Kiba, Akino, Asia, and Kaneko tragic pasts and fixed their problems. I was blamed for not understand that selfish crimson-haired spoiled princess Rias feeling by not calling her by her ing name. But all this time Rias and the whole ORC didn't care about me one bit. They all just used me for my power along with the whole DXD team. I even helped Surzex with his little sister Rias' problems and helped him so many times. I also helped Azazel so many times, helping him with his inventions, and that bastard even said that I was like a son to him. Issei speaks with anger growing inside of him. He clenches his fists, and felt rage inside of him. I helped that bitch Kuroka to get back into her little sister good book, and fix her problems with her little sister of hating her, and the devil's councils that wanted her dead, and wanted to kill her for killing her master. I was disowned by my own bastard parents who had abused me in my childhood. Everything that goes wrong I blamed for by my abusive parents, and beaten black and blue by bastard father. Issei clenched his fist so hard that blood began to drip from his hands. But now because of that bastard Rivzium Lucifer who had killed Drake, and no longer having a sacred gear, I was tossed aside like a piece of garbage, like I was nothing, and a broken tool that no one need anymore. That bastard Surzex and Azazel planning of kicking me of the peerage, and ones who started out this who betray in the first place. Rias and Akino whore their self out to Kiba. Zenobia and Asia also whore their self out to Vala. After everything I had done for those ungrateful bastards of the Devil King Surzex, the former governor of the Fallen Angels, Azazel, the ORC, Student Council, Vala team and DXD team. Issei snarled out in utter rage. So, I'm now going to start a blood feud with the bastards who betrayed me, and I'm also going to get my revenge on that bastard Rivzium Lucifer, and make him pay, Issei said with determined in his brown eyes. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Soul Ripper Ghost 95 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.